So for our next guest here at Regenerated Me, I'm delighted to be able to talk to a very talented artist whose work has been widely exhibited in such places as the National Portrait Gallery, Tate Britain, and the Turner Contemporary in Margate. She's a writer, she's a lecturer, artist, photographer, and can I say from personal experience, a truly great cook of Chinese cuisine. Grace Lau, a very warm welcome to Regenerated Me.
Hello, Martin.
Hello, Grace. Lovely to see you again. Now, Grace, you've a Chinese surname, Lau. Your parents were both Chinese, but you were born here in the UK in, if you don't mind me saying, you were born in August 1939. You were born in London?
Yes, absolutely. My father was a diplomat in the former Chinese embassy. So my mother and my father both resided in London, and I was born there.
Born in London, at the Royal Free?
At the Royal Free.
Royal Free in Hampstead, yes, where my own son was born.
There you go.
There you go. So, war?
So during the war, I can't remember much during the war because I'd just been born. But my parents told me we had to go to Wales for protection.
Right.
And then we came back. And when we came back, my father was relocated back to China for 5 years or so. And I went with him, with my parents, to reassign his next post, his next diplomatic post.
So, Hannah, you were born in the UK, you went back to China when you were how old?
Let me see, that 1945, just after the war.
45, yes, so you were quite young.
So I was young, 5 and a bit.
And then you returned back to London?
And then we all returned back to London just before 49 when the communists took over, because we had to flee for our lives.
Goodness, so how old would you have been when you came back?
10, 11.
10, 11. And you were living in Highgate?
In Hampstead.
In Hampstead, in northwest London?
Yes.
And you were at school?
I went to school, Parliament Hill School.
Oh, Parliament Hill School, yes. I know that well. Next to William Ellis Grammar School.
Yes, indeed.
And so, but tell me, Grace, I mean, your background and your heritage, how do you think it shaped you as an artist and influenced you to become an artist? What was it like at school? Were there things that you thought, were you treated differently because of your Chinese origin?
Well, you're talking about racism.
Well, not necessarily racism. Often it's just they don't know because they haven't seen anything like this before.
I know.
Not necessarily racism.
No, I know what you mean. It was early times, it's true. There weren't that many Chinese in England, in London anyway.
Right.
And those that were in London were mostly the ones who worked in East End as restaurant owners, chefs and cooks and waiters and so on. So my father and his group of diplomats and elite intellectuals were quite rare. And so I suppose we were treated differently. But as a child, you're not aware of these things. You're not aware of racism as it exists. You're aware sometimes that people looked at you a bit strangely. You're aware sometimes that people's attitude towards you were a little bit wary or a little bit different.
Hostile?
Hostile, no. I would say no. Partly because I spoke English very well.
Right.
My father spoke English very well. He had to. He was a diplomat. So we were in a way elite and middle class, and we lived in Hampstead, and we had a cook and a cleaner. In fact,
you had staff.
We had
staff. Everyone needs staff at the time.
That's right.
If you can afford it,
yes.
Staff are great. But did you feel though that being this outsider in inverted commas?
Yes.
Did it in any way influence your later decisions, your later career
definitely.
decisions?
I think being an artist, everything that you experience in life, everything that you are, influences and informs your future art. It has to do because art is subjective and not objective. And whatever you produce is shaped by your experience, by your relationship with other people, by your context, in fact.
Were you at art school?
No, I didn't go to art school. After I went to grammar school, I left and I wanted to explore the world. A lot of my contemporaries were sort of going overland and exploring Europe because it was safe to do so at that time. There wasn't any of that.
Hitchhiking? Hitchhiking
yes,
in those days?
Indeed, absolutely. I hitchhiked to Scotland once,
yes, all
by myself in lorries. It was fun.
You did Scotland by yourself?
Yes,
I did it with a friend of mine. We were 16. We went from we managed to get to John O'Groats.
No, I didn't go that far. I hitched to Scotland, and I met a friend up there, and I did have a sort of slight brush with racism at that point, and I'll tell you about it now. It was when we pulled up in her car at a garage, and the garage assistant would come and put petrol in your car, like they used to do.
Yeah, yes, of course. And in certain countries they still do.
Yeah. And he put the hosepipe in her car and put petrol in, and then he looked in the car and saw me sitting in the passenger seat, and he turned to her and said to her, she was English, you see, he turned to and said to her, does she speak English? And I burst out laughing. I really did laugh. I thought that was very funny.
Yeah.
I said, hi, mate. Yes, I do. I certainly
Speak
do.
perfectly, probably better than you do, mate. that reminds me, I'll just tell you briefly, when I was a school kid growing up in Broxbourne in Hertfordshire, I was only about 7 or 8, went to someone's house for tea. And I knocked on the door, and they had a dog, a Labrador, that barked its head off. And when I came in, the barking went on. And the mother... She said, he's not normally like this. He doesn't normally bark so loudly. She said, don't worry, it's probably because you're Jewish. So
the dog recognises
the
you?
dog recognised it. Whether the dog was
Wonderful.
anti-Semite or not, I don't know. But the dog, maybe I smelt differently. I don't know. Too much sauerkraut and too many kosher Viennas. I don't know. But
you have to laugh. Really.
You have to laugh. Yeah. And did you took a camera with you on your travels?
No. Not at that point. I did later on, after I left my husband, and this was 10 years later.
Yes,
then I started taking an interest in photography and.
So that didn't come until your 20s, 30s when you took up the camera?
In my 30s, in my late 20s and 30s, I was given a Nikon, a lovely little 35mm Nikon, and I took it on travels. I was travelling overland through India, through the Himalayas and through Nepal, as we all used to do.
Well, the Hippy Trail?
Yeah, the Hippy Trail. I did all that Hippy Trail. And when I came back, the photos I took were horrible, really horrible. They certainly didn't reflect what I felt when I was up there. So I decided I needed to be educated in this new media.
Yes.
And I did. I went to an art college. I went to do a photography degree, which I did. And I was in the University of Westminster, which is now called that anyway. And I got a degree in photography, and so my photography career took off then.
Brilliant. And so the course really helped?
Oh, yes.
In terms of the techniques?
Well, not only the techniques, but how you should think. And it gave you a wider aspect, a wider context in what you can do with a camera, which means not just to record literally, but to record feelings, emotions, and the impressions, in other words, to use photography as an art, not just a tool.
Interesting, very interesting, because it's obviously something that stuck with you all those years,
yes,
and you've developed it and evolved it. In fact, just to quote you about your portrait photography, which you're pretty well known for. You said that, and I quote this: the traditional representational or literal approach is inadequate. So I think you sort of hinted on that, but can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I got into portraiture photography because I liked the way, I saw so much portraiture all over. I went to a lot of exhibitions and there was lots of portraiture. It was a very popular form of photography, and it was very easy to do. But I didn't think that any of the portraits actually reflected the true person, or to reflect the interpretation of the artist, of the photographer. So I thought, I get into this. I think I can take portraiture. Seems to be quite straightforward. I did a few portraits of people, but I wasn't happy with those. And then I got introduced into a different world altogether, a rather subterranean world, the world of fetishism.
Oh, right, okay. Yes, I was going to come to that, actually.
Yeah.
Because you've got a bit of a reputation, haven't you, Grace, dare I say it, of being a photographer of perverse taste. To put it politely. So so talk me through, because you did get into you did a project called Adults in Wonderland.
Yeah. Well, here I can link together your former question about the literary representation of portraiture, as well as the fetish photography. Because when I got into the fetish world, it was by accident, really. A friend of mine,
as one does, one's always falling into the fetish world.
It is, it's true, but one must take advantage of these accidents.
Yeah.
It was a friend of mine who was a banker, actually. I won't name any names because, you know, he might get into trouble.
He might get into trouble, yeah.
And anyway, there were lots of bankers in this world. But he used to go to a club where people, men and women, could dress up in identities that they couldn't normally, in fantasy identities, or in rubber and leather, or in feminine clothes. I mean, men could wear drag, men could wear anything they wanted. They could wear high heel
And
shoes.
this was way before Pride, way before
way
it became...
This was in the 80s. This was in the early 80s.
Yes.
And there weren't many clubs which allowed these sort of things openly. So the few clubs that were in existence had to go underground. And we went to this underground, well, he took me to this underground club. It was called the Maitresse, and no more exists. And it was in Soho, just off Soho Square.
Yes, no, well,
I
I used to work in Soho Square, all around there.
In a basement where you go down the stairs and where you entered a dark cavern.
Right.
And it was just like...
Were you nervous the first time you went?
No, curious.
Curious.
That's the motivation for my work and for my life, I guess, curiosity.
Well, hang on, when you go there for the first time, you're curious. You've got your camera with you?
Yes, of course.
But surely there's a bit of anxiousness, anxiety about you with your camera, and them.
No, because I'm Chinese, so they can't categorize.
Did that help your Chinese?
Absolutely, I come into that as
Race,
well.
your culture?
It all blends in together into one picture of myself. If you wait for me to explain.
Oh, all right, then I will. Go on.
Going down into this Maitresse club, being quite a short Chinese woman with a camera, I guess they were as curious about me as I was about them. But there wasn't any hostile feeling because they were projecting their own fantasies. They were projecting images and identities that they wouldn't normally do so in their outside world.
Yes.
And so me being a kind of quote misfit in my world, I fitted in there and they accepted me. So I was, in fact, welcome. I was allowed to go around, take pictures of anybody I wanted to, take pictures of the goings-on, and there was quite a few kind of rather, quote, naughty, saucy going-ons.
Of course.
But there weren't any other photographers, you see, doing this sort of thing at that time.
It seems to me that you had to build up some elements of trust, though.
Oh, of course, there's trust.
You have to trust the photographer, especially if it's to do with portraiture.
Yes, but most
and
of them,
very intimate things happening.
Most of them were wearing masks, Martin,
right.
And it was very dark in there. So you couldn't really recognise faces. So what I did was to document. I documented what was going on with my camera, sometimes with a flash, sometimes without. But in any case, I did what I could with my little 35mm handheld camera, which is all that I had at that point. And some of the pictures worked and some didn't, of course, it's always the case. But those that worked, I contacted the people that were in the photographs and they were delighted. I gave it to them. They were delighted.
Did they have the right to edit? Did they have the right to say, please don't?
This is not an edit. This is not a digital, Martin.
But to say
camera.
To you, please don't publish that photograph.
No, there was nothing like that at that time. Told you I was the only one
right.
taking photographs. There was no such thing as printed in the newspapers or anything like that. There weren't any. People didn't know about these clubs. People didn't know that there were groups of people. It could be your next door neighbour, it could be your doctor, it could be your dentist, it could be your teacher, your cab driver, that liked a different role at night. They liked to get dressed up and go to visit these clubs or these parties.
So what did you say to these people? What was your pitch to them? Why were you there? Purely as an observer?
Purely as an observer, as a guest of my friend. And then eventually when I got a few clothes and dressed up myself, they welcomed me as one of them.
Right,
so
that makes it easier.
So I could take pictures from the inside out.
And then did that develop into the book that you produced?
Yes. 10 years later, I produced a book. This was in 1997. I produced a book called Adults in Wonderland, which was a sort of retrospective of what I did. And I had an exhibition in a gallery in King's Cross, which was very, very popular, so popular that it was in the newspapers and in the Time Out magazine, yes. Which at that time was published, and I had a front page. I had a huge interview inside, and then my work took off. And then I thought, well, this could get me some money. So I opened up my own studio, and I advertised the fetish photographer photographing your fantasies for £100.
Right.
And a lot of people came to my studio. which was kind of kitted out like a dungeon playground, yeah, with chains and things hanging on the walls, whips, and all sorts of gadgets and things, and people could come and get dressed. Men could come and dress up as women, which a lot of them did. In fact, most of my customers were men who dressed up as women, and other women came dressed up as dominatrixes with their slaves on chains, or led in, with a dog collar. And they had their whips and their high heel shoes, and I took photographs of them. But I also went to people's homes and took photographs of them at home, and that's where I think my best pictures came out, because they were not
more relaxed. Were they more?
They were much more, not only more relaxed, but it was the contrast between an ordinary council flat with potted plants.
Yes, and a view of the waterworks.
Yes, that's it. Yes, absolutely. And a floral carpet.
Yes.
And sort of G5 furniture.
G plan, and an avocado bathroom suite.
That's it.
Yes.
And then they were dressed up in this
quite exotically,
completely fantastical gear, which they had suitcases of, and they had their own dressing room.
So from an artist's point of view, great subject matter.
Absolutely.
And you're being paid.
Yes, I was being paid. I gave them the pictures.
Yes.
And a lot of these were in the books. At that point, I did ask for permission to publish, and they were all delighted. And then they were, that they were actually seen to be out there, as it were, and not ashamed of themselves or embarrassed.
Did that help you then, do you believe, to get to the real person underneath because if you're taking pictures of people in masks and chains and they've got whips and everything, how does it help you as an artist reach the real person? Because we're talking about portraiture and how we don't want to just skim the surface. We want to get to the nub of the personality.
No, I don't want to get to the nub of the personality, Martin. I never wanted to get to the nub of it.
I stand corrected.
There's no point in trying to get to the real person. There's no one real person. There's about 5 or 6 different real persons. Everybody is 5 or 6 or even more real persons.
Of course. What they're projecting at that given time.
So it's always an interpretation, an artist's interpretation of what that person is and the context. And the important thing for me is always their performance in front of my camera. I mean, all the world is a stage, and that is absolutely true, and everyone's an actor. And they're acting for me. I'm the director, and they're acting roles for me.
I understand, but are there ever occasions, though, where you've been commissioned to do, a picture of a politician or the CEO of a large company, and you're there to reflect their, in inverted commas, true character?
Yeah, I don't do these commercial photographs, portraits. I don't do these.
Right. Is that because you just don't think you're going to get...
Because I can't do them.
You can't do them. It's just not on your remit.
It's not on my agenda.
Not on your agenda.
I'm not curious about these people. I have to be curious about people to photograph them.
That's interesting. Because it sort of leads me to... I think it was a project that you were working on a while back when I first got to know you. Having seen 1 or 2 coffins in the garden. We were slightly shocked, but we thought, this doesn't matter, it's Grace. What on earth is she doing now? And understand it's from doing a little bit more background research into it. It was a project that you called Add Dressing Death. So add / dressing death.
Yes,
talk me through that, because what I saw was both shocking and very interesting at the same time.
Yes, well, it's all lead on from the dungeon portraits. I mean, my work always leads on one to the other. So this was after I'd come to Hastings, and the fetish scene was kind of going more mainstream,
yes.
And so I wasn't interested in it anymore. My curiosity had been satisfied. I'd done my bit. The camera had done its bit as well, and I'd come out with a book. So when I came down to Hastings, I was looking for projects to do down here. I have done some, and this was one of them, which was called Addressing Death, because at that point, a friend of mine had committed suicide, and it was still pretty raw. I went to her funeral, and it was very sad. And I thought, death is a subject, it's a taboo subject. It's another taboo subject, just like fetishism. People don't want to talk about it in this country. In the West,
I agree.
In Western culture, it is something to be afraid of and something not to be talked about. It just.
I think it's changing slightly now.
Yeah. It is changing slightly, but it's still a delicate subject. So, and I thought it shouldn't be, because everyone's going to die at one point or another anyway. What's the
yes,
secret?
exactly. It's death and taxes, as they say. We're not going to avoid
and
either.
How can I add this to my repertoire of photography? How can I do it in my way? Because I've become very curious about it, having seen it firsthand after my friend had committed suicide, and with all that, I just thought I like to actually. It's cathartic for me too to deal with it like that. So I thought, how can I represent it? And then I thought, well, how would it be if I represented death in a life form, as it were? So if I asked people to perform, again, to perform for me in their favourite clothes, which actually shows them as almost as alive, but yet dead in a coffin. And the coffin...
Actually in a coffin,
yes. Yes, actually in a coffin, because having done photographs in a dungeon, I thought the context is very important, in whether it's in a dungeon or whether it's in people's council homes. What about the context here? Obviously, it's a coffin. They're dead, aren't they? So a coffin, okay. I looked around for a carpenter, a joiner in Hastings, and there were plenty, and a very good joiner actually agreed to do it.
You must give me his name after he's still alive. I'm always out for good carpenters.
And a good coffin, perhaps?
Yeah, maybe a good coffin. Maybe, hopefully not for now, but always good to know.
Yeah, so he made a coffin, a black coffin for me, 6 feet in length.
Yes.
And I asked for some volunteers, and a lot of people came forward, in fact. And one of my favourite was Judy. Judy. And she dressed, my friend Judy, she's a very, very, a woman full of vitality, full of health and vigour, and she loved the project, and she wasn't afraid to dress up in her favourite clothes, holding a glass of wine and lying.
That's interesting. I was going to come to that. The props that you
lying for me in the coffin. So we did that, and so I started asking other people to put on their favourite clothes, to have an object which is one of their favourite objects, or what they would like to die with, in their hands.
Right. Yes.
And so people posed for me in that fashion, and she loves glasses of wine, so she had a bottle.
She had a
of wine
glass, or she had the whole bottle.
Yeah, and a bottle and a glass in the coffin, and I photographed her, and I photographed the whole series, and some of them were shown at the Hastings Museum of Art. Oh, it must have been about 20 years ago.
About 20 years ago, that's right. And at a similar period of time, you did I think we all took part in it, actually. It was to do with a very, what I call, traditional Chinese backdrop, with basically anyone coming in off the street and having their portraitures done.
That was the start of a very big project, which took off not at the same time, just after the addressing death project. At that point, I'd given up work because I was looking around for work to do down here, but there wasn't any. In Hastings, it's rather difficult. I was lecturing in the London College of, as it was called then, London College of Printing, LCP.
Yes.
But now it's called London University of the Arts, London. Sorry. Anyway, I was lecturing there. I gave that up after I'd done the coffin project, and I applied to the Arts Council for some funding to carry out another project, which was based on my experience as a Chinese, and this is all to do with my roots and my background.
So almost coming a full circle, if you like.
Well, it is, but it's always in the background, always that I am not of the mainstream, that I am more fringe than the mainstream. That's why I'm curious about other people. My curiosity kills the cat, as they say.
Yeah. I'm going to kick my cat away from you.
Yeah, I think you better. I could eat it.
Yeah, exactly. Very tasty, I'm sure. But it's interesting, but that's been with you all the time. This sense of being different, being a slight outsider, being an observer, rather than a participator.
Well, a misfit, but an observer and being curious. Always curious about other people.
Because if you go back to what you were telling me about when you went into the fetish clubs, that was probably more to get under the skin of the environment rather than you being, correct me if I'm wrong, a major fetishist. It's all about trying to be there, take better pictures, build confidence.
Yes, there's all of that.
But still as a slight outsider.
Yes, taking pictures, but getting in to take pictures from the inside out,
yes.
Stepping in. And rather than from the outside in, but always on the fringe. I'm never inside. I was never inside the fetish scene myself. I tried it a few times. I didn't particularly like
Wasn't your cup of tea?
Holding a whip. I prefer holding a camera. So, I wasn't ever part of the inside.
Oh, yes. No, I see that. So then looking at this more recent project,
yes,
with you as the person with a Chinese heritage.
Yes, this project has many layers of both cultural and historical and racial meanings. In fact, it's a very multi-complex project.
Explain it in simplistic terms.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember there was this backdrop.
Yeah, let me explain.
You explain it. You always explain things better than I do.
Well, since it's my project, I come from.
I understand.
I needed some money to do this because I'd given up my job and the pension wasn't enough to support my lifestyle.
Yes.
So I decided, okay, I'll do a main project that will take me forward to the next few years. What can I do and how can I fund it? The Arts Council were at that time dishing out money for cultural diversity projects. And I was looking at their website and their criteria, and I thought, this suits me. Okay, cultural diversity, that's me. And I thought, a project I've always wanted to do was to photograph people in a different setting, which I did in the fetish scene anyway, and in the coffin scene. But to photograph the ordinary people, not just the fetish people or people on the
people literally off the street,
literally off the streets. And Hastings provides a perfect subject material because there are so many different types of people in Hastings. You get the fishermen, the bikers, you get the youth,
the DFLs, the down from Londoners.
Yes, the youth, the down from Londoners, the fishermen, all of this. You get a whole variety of diverse people.
And the holiday makers, of course.
And holiday makers. You don't get so much racial diversity, I have to say. I've seen very few Asians on the beach when I first came. There are more now, but when I
think it's more mixed now.
Yeah, when I first came, there were hardly any. You don't see any. You only see white faces on the beach. Anyway, I thought, right, how can I get people out of their comfort zone, out of their context, and still ask them or persuade them to perform for me on the platform of photography.
Yes, yes.
So it took a long time to do research because at that point I was writing a book called Looking at the Chinese, actually. It was about researching into the history of colonial photography in China in the late 19th century and early 20th century during the Opium Wars and all that. So there was a lot of background, a lot of historical background at that point. And China was going through a huge monumental period of conflict, as well as the Western invasions and the Opium Wars and so on. And I thought that's a perfect kind of background for my subjects in Hastings. So then I devised a background of a very elaborate, exotic Chinese sort of pavilion.
Very traditional
Chinese pavilion. And this was drawn out for me by a colleague of mine who was a theatre designer, a muralist, and she did a wonderful, huge canvas painting of something like the Brighton Pavilion. It was based on all sorts of chinoiserie objects and things inside it. Anyway, it was a very exotic background, and that became my studio, my portraiture studio, portable one, because then in the junk shops...
Roll it up, basically, take it with you.
I can take it, roll it up and take it with me anywhere and put it up anywhere. And then I found...
It was quite big, wasn't it? You could get a whole family in front of it.
Yeah, and then I found the other props in various junk shops in Hastings, like Robert's Rummage.
Yeah, yes.
And a panda skin, for instance, which was a kind of side reference to the tiger skins that the British used to have, to decorate their dining room halls and their lounges to show that they shot a tiger or a bear or whatever. And this was a panda skin, but a fake one, of course. It's a fake one.
So you're almost turning the whole table.
I was turning the whole table. I was asking the British people to pose in an exotic Chinese studio as the exotic subjects. And I was the photographer. I became the imperialist photographer. Right? So it was turning...
Exactly.
Yeah.
What was that? Remind me, what was that particular project? What was the name of that particular project?
It's called the 21st Century Types.
21st Century Types.
Yes, and then that represents, or it was informed by anthropologists, Western anthropologists who went to Asia and Africa and the Pacific Islands and places, and they photographed the natives in these places always as primitive, as savages, as barbarians, and they became the types. They didn't give them a name or anything, but they became types for the anthropologists and for the scientists to identify in order to put them, the white people, as in superior position.
Fine. And you've turned the tables.
You're
in command. Yes. Quite right too. Finally, Grace, our tagline here at Regenerated Me is 3 school years and then some. Now, it's hopefully a line that resonates with a lot of us who are over 60. What is it that keeps you inspired, keeps you very much in the game, so to speak?
Well, it's all through my work, isn't it? It's only one word to sum that up, and it's curiosity. As long as you've got curiosity, you're alive. And
That's true.
You are going forward in the world, and you are finding out about things, and you are doing research, and you're actually looking at things, you're feeling things.
Does that reflect the way you look after yourself physically as well? Your curiosity, does it mean that you are not going to be prone to, you're going to be more like to exercise more, keep yourself fit? So
well, you have to. If you're a curious person, you have to go all over the place to
satisfy
your curiosity.
So from your innate curiosity comes your, if you like, innate youthfulness, to for want of a better term.
Well, thank you, Martin. But yes,
it's true, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And energy and lifestyle. It's all part of one, and it all stems from your mind. Your mind is what drives you forward. It's what keeps you alive and keeps you well and keeps you healthy and gives you a long life.
That's brilliant. Grace Lau, many thanks for talking to me today.
Thank
That's
you,
brilliant.
Martin.
Thanks so much.